Welcome everyone. In this Kubernetes and CKAD tips number 7, I'm going to talk about kubectl and how can you get the required information from its built-in help capability. So let's see that option. Now what I'm going to do is that I'm going to switch to my terminal and then I am going to clean this up. And let's suppose I want to create a pod or get something out of that. So I know that there is a command called krun, but I'm not sure what all actually it takes. Now, Kubernetes or kubectl, right now I'm using k because I have used something like k equals to kubectl so that I don't have to type the thing again and again. So if I say krun and I'm not sure exactly what I'm trying to do, I can do help. Now, if you start fresh and you want to know what all kubectl offers, if you say -h, you see all these commands, right? So you have create, you have expose, run, set, right? And then you have got some basic command like explain, get, edit, delete, etc., etc. So you get, it's a pretty long list, right? And each of these things has got its own capabilities inside, and we are focusing on the run, right? So which basically helps us create a container. To understand how run works, so what we can do, we can say k run -h. And in fact, if you go inside run, it not only talks about what all different parameters you can pass, but it also tells you some of the examples. So for example, this one, it says that you say run nginx, that's the name of the pod, and the image nginx. So if you want to run an nginx container inside a pod, so you get this command executed and it will run the container, right? So you can see that it has got also couple of additional capabilities of passing on some of the things which we will be talking a little later when you go a bit deeper inside pod. But you get to know that you have got all the things you can do. So you can even add levels while creating the pod. So if you have, let's say, a couple of levels you want to add, you can just say -l or dash levels equals to, and then pass those key value pair separated by comma if you have more than one levels you need to pass. You can even define a pod with a limit saying that, hey, I don't want my container to use X amount of CPU and X amount of memory, right? So that kind of limit you can define. You can also define the port. Your pod gonna expose the container within the pod gonna expose. So if you, let's say, use Nginx, and then if you want to expose the port 80, you say -- port 80. So it will expose the port 80 for that pod. So those are the many different things you can do, right? And you can see that it basically um, talks about many options. But let's just focus on creating a container, right? So if you say krun nginx, that's the name of the container, and image is nginx, and rest all are optional. So even if you don't pass, it will assume that. But let me, because it's an HTTP based container, so we'll use port 80, right? We can even say L, right? Or -- labels, and then I say app my app client contoso. Okay. If you have more than one, you just put a comma and then add one more. So that way you can keep adding the levels. Now, if you do that, everything is fine, then it will create the pod, right? So if you say k get pod, it will show you the pod, right? Nginx is running. Now, if you say show levels, you'll see that the client Contoso, which the level I have added, is visible here. And then if you say k get pod nginx YAML, that's the definition. If you go there and inside the container, you find that I've got a container port 80 because I have mentioned that this container needs to be exposed by port 80. That's a container port, right? So I can have, let's say, 2, 3 containers within a pod. That's possible. And then have individual port opened for individual containers. So a port in a container is very specific to the application you are running inside that container. So if you are on application which requires some other port, TCP port, you define that TCP port while creating the pod past that. And it basically is part of your YAML. When we will talk more about YAML and modifying YAML, we will do that quite often. So this is quite a helpful way to get help, right? So remember that if you, even if you don't know anything, you say kubectl create dash help. It'll show you what all things you can create using the control, right? So if you say kubectl help create, you see that it basically creates these many objects as of today, right? So if you want to create, let's say, a deployment, let's pick that one. And if you don't know what all parameters it takes, you put deployment H, and you see now it talks about the deploy. And then even if you do not need to specify the full deployment, you can say deploy. That will work, and that will give you a lot of speed while you are typing. And you can see that there is an example already available, right? And it talks about the deployment name, my deployment. I just copied the whole thing and I ran that, and it will create um, pod called some random name, because in deployment the pods are auto generated, right? So it will be controlled by the deployment. So we don't create pod, we create a deployment, and then deployment makes sure that your pod is up and running all the time. So that's a kind of behavior typically in the deployment kind of scenario. If you want to say get deploy, that will show you the deployment which got created, that is my deploy. And then if you say get PO comma deploy, I'll show you both pod and deployment, right? So you just need to remove this PO and deploy. Pods, I will use get all, which will show me not only the deployment and pod, but also the replica set. Sorry, pods. So you can see that get pods is showing all the pods. And then if I say get all, it'll show you all the thing like your pod, the deployment, the replica set, right? So you can easily get a lot of help from the existing built-in kubectl CLI help. And to in my opinion, this is one of the best help I have ever seen in the CLI world, that it gives enough information that you do not need to refer any external things. You can continue from the help, and even you have some examples. All the subcommands will also have examples. How do you pass the values? So you don't need literally to switch out of this window to get the help and then come back here. So you can continue working and get all the helps you need, right? So with this, I want to end the discussion here. Thank you very much for watching this.